My professor gave me an F, convinced my grandfather's old red hat proved I was unworthy of an education. He had no idea that when he marched off to complain about my anti-intellectualism to the dean, he was walking straight into a confrontation with my own father. The first time I wore the hat to his class, I could feel the temperature drop by 10 degrees. It wasn't a conscious act of defiance, not really. It was just a hat, a red baseball cap my grandfather had given me before he passed away. He was a Marine, a patriot to his core, and he'd worn it every day. When he gave it to me, he said, "Don't ever be ashamed of what you believe in, kid." So I wasn't. Professor Albright's class, Post-War American Politics, was the one I'd been looking forward to all semester. He was a legend on campus, brilliant, demanding, with a reputation for intellectual rigor that bordered on terrifying. His lectures were mesmerizing, and for the first few weeks I was his model student. I sat in the front row, participated in every discussion, and my first midterm came back with a 98%. Then came the day I wore the hat. I walked in, took my usual seat, and noticed him pause mid-sentence. His steely eyes, usually sweeping across the lecture hall, locked onto me, specifically onto the red cap on my head. He didn't say anything, not directly, but the air changed. When he asked a question about the socio-economic impact of Reaganomics, my hand shot up as usual. He looked right through me, picking a girl in the back row who hadn't even looked up from her phone. It started subtly. My comments in class were suddenly lacking nuance. My discussion points were parroting cable news rhetoric. He would stop just short of insulting me, wrapping his critiques in academic jargon, but the message was clear. He had decided who I was based on a piece of stitched fabric. I tried to prove him wrong. I doubled down on my reading, spent extra hours in the library, and made sure every point I made was backed by cited sources and scholarly articles. I wanted him to see me, the student, not the stereotype he'd projected onto me. It didn't matter. It was like I had become invisible. The final grade for the course hinged on a single, massive research paper, 60% of our total score. I poured my soul into it. My topic was the shifting political landscape of the Rust Belt, a subject I was passionate about. I interviewed out-of-work factory workers, union leaders, and local politicians. I spent weeks collating data, analyzing voting patterns, and crafting what I knew, objectively, was the best academic work of my life. I was proud of it. I was so sure this would be the thing to finally break through his prejudice. I submitted it a week early, confident I'd secured my A. The day grades were posted online. I logged in with a knot of anticipation in my stomach. I scrolled down the list. Digital media. A. Microeconomics. A. Post-war American politics. F. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. F. Not a C, not even a D. A failure. A 0. It was impossible. My 3.9 GPA was about to be annihilated. My graduation was in jeopardy. I checked again, thinking it had to be a typo, a glitch in the system. But there it was, a stark digital F. I printed out the rubric and the paper and went straight to his office hours the next day. He was sitting behind a mountain of books, sipping tea from a delicate cup. He looked up, his expression one of mild annoyance. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "not inviting me to sit? To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Professor Albright," I started, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm here about my final paper. There must be some mistake. I received an F." He leaned back in his chair, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "There is no mistake, Mr. Thompson. The grade is correct." "But how?" I asked, my frustration mounting. I cited over 40 peer-reviewed sources. My thesis was clear. My methodology was sound. The rubric also mentions critical thought. He cut in, his voice like chipped ice. "Something your paper was sorely lacking. It read more like a propaganda piece than a serious academic inquiry. You simply regurgitated partisan talking points without a shred of original analysis." I was stunned. "That's not true. I presented multiple viewpoints. I included data that contradicted my own thesis to provide a balanced argument. Can you show me specifically where I failed to meet the standard? In the rubric? On the paper?" I held out the pages, but he just waved a dismissive hand. "I don't have time to relitigate your grade. The decision is final. Frankly, I'm not surprised. Your in-class performance has been subpar all semester." Subpar? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I participated every single day until you started ignoring me. This isn't about my work, is it? This is about my hat." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. His eyes narrowed into slits. He stood up slowly, placing his hands flat on his desk. The pretense of academic decorum vanished, replaced by pure, unvarnished contempt. The fact that you would wear that symbol of anti-intellectualism and bigotry into a hall of learning tells me everything I need to know about your capacity for critical thought, he hissed. You've demonstrated a fundamental inability to engage with the principles of this institution. The F stands. My mind was reeling, a mix of white-hot anger and cold, desperate panic. My graduation, my future, all up in smoke because of his prejudice. I had one last card to play. I had to. I'm going to have to appeal this, I said, my voice low and steady. I'm taking this to the dean. Professor Albright actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. Go right ahead, he sneered, straightening his tie with an air of absolute finality. I have a meeting with Dean Thompson this afternoon, as it happens. I'm quite certain he'll agree that this university has no place for your brand of ignorance. I walked out of his office in a daze, his arrogant laugh echoing in my ears. Dean Thompson. He'd said the name with such confidence, such absolute certainty, that the highest academic authority in the university would be his ally. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. I leaned against the cool brick wall of the hallway, taking a deep breath to stop my hands from shaking. I had never, not once in my 4 years here, used my father's position to my advantage. I'd insisted on it. I got into this university on my own SAT scores, maintained my GPA through my own all-nighters, and navigated its social and academic labyrinths on my own terms. My dad was just Dad. He was the guy I called for advice, the guy who sent me care packages full of beef jerky, the guy who always reminded me to get my oil changed. He was also Dr. Robert Thompson, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. Professor Albright had no idea. To him I was just another anonymous student, easily categorized and dismissed. He saw the hat and filled in all the blanks himself. Ignorant, lazy, probably from some backwater town. He hadn't seen the hours I put in, the passion I had for the subject, or the fact that I was acing every other class I was taking. He saw a symbol and decided the person wearing it was unworthy of a fair evaluation. And now he was marching off to complain about me to my own father. A slow, cold anger began to replace the panic. This wasn't about getting my A back anymore. This was about a professor who wielded his power like a weapon, deciding a student's future based on his own political biases. How many other students had he done this to? Students who didn't have a dean for a father. Students who would have just accepted the F, their confidence shattered, their futures altered, because they were too intimidated to fight back. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my dad's contact. I hesitated for a second, a wave of guilt washing over me. I felt like I was breaking my own sacred rule. But this wasn't asking for a favor. This was reporting a fire. He picked up on the second ring. Jake, hey, everything all right? I was just about to head into a meeting. Yeah, Dad, I know, I said, my voice tight. With a Professor Albright? There was a pause on the other end. That's right. How did you know? He's my post-war politics professor, I said, and then the whole story came tumbling out. The hat, the subtle digs, the perfect midterm, the impossible-to-fail paper, and the final damning conversation in his office. I relayed his words as accurately as I could, especially the part about the symbol of anti-intellectualism, and his smug confidence that the dean would back him up. My dad was silent for a long moment when I finished. I could picture him in his office, leaning back in his leather chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He wasn't just a dad listening to his son vent. He was the dean of the university, processing a serious accusation of academic malpractice. Jacob, he finally said, his voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone he used when he was no longer just my dad. His meeting is in 10 minutes. I want you in my office in 5. Sit in the chair by the window. Don't say a word. Don't even look at him. Just let him talk. Do you understand? Yes, sir, I said. I'll handle this. The dean's office was on the top floor of the administration building, with a wide window overlooking the campus quad. It was an intimidating room, all dark wood and shelves filled with serious-looking books. I did as he asked, sinking into a plush armchair in the corner, feeling like a ghost already. My dad gave me a single, reassuring nod before turning his attention to some papers on his desk, his face a mask of professional neutrality. Exactly 10 minutes later, there was a sharp rap on the door. Come in, my dad called out. Professor Albright strode in like he owned the place. He was holding my paper in his hand, a triumphant look on his face. He saw me in the corner, and a malicious smirk flickered across his lips. He clearly thought I'd run here to tattle, and my father had summoned me to be dressed down in front of my accuser. He was practically preening. "Dean Thompson, thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Albright began, taking the seat opposite my father's desk. "It seems we have a rather unfortunate situation with one of my students, Mr. Thompson, as you can see." He gestured dismissively in my direction without even making eye contact. "Go on, Professor," my dad said, his voice level. Albright launched into his performance. He painted a picture of a disruptive, borderline combative student who was more interested in political posturing than genuine scholarship. He claimed my paper was a disgrace to academic standards, and that my challenge to his grade was an attempt at intellectual bullying. He was articulate, passionate, and utterly convincing if you didn't know the truth. "Frankly, Dean," he concluded, leaning forward with an air of grave importance, "it's this kind of attitude that erodes the very foundation of higher education. If we allow students to intimidate faculty into giving them grades they haven't earned simply because they are loud and belligerent, we've already lost. I had to make a stand. The F is not just a grade, it's a message." He leaned back, satisfied, looking at my father for the expected nod of agreement, the promise of disciplinary action against me. My dad sat silently for a few seconds, letting Albright's words hang in the air. He steepled his fingers, his gaze unreadable. He looked at Professor Albright, then his eyes flicked over to me in the corner. Then he looked back at the professor, who was still glowing with self-righteousness. "Thank you for your candid assessment, Professor," my dad said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your commitment to your principles is noted. Now, before we proceed, I feel a formal introduction is in order. Professor Albright, I'd like you to meet my son, Jacob." The color drained from Professor Albright's face so fast I thought he was going to faint. His jaw went slack, his eyes darting between me and my father, as if his brain was short-circuiting, unable to process the new information. The smug certainty he'd worn like a suit of armor moments before dissolved into a puddle of pure, unadulterated panic. He opened his mouth, then closed it, making a small, fish-like gulping sound. Your son?" he stammered, the words barely a whisper. "My son," my father repeated, his voice as cold and hard as granite. He picked up my paper from his desk, the one Albright had brought in as evidence. "The son who, until 7 weeks ago, was your top student. The son who got a 98 on your midterm. The son who, according to the official gradebook, had a perfect participation record until the exact day he first wore a hat you didn't approve of." My dad leaned forward, the full weight of his authority settling into the room. "You didn't come here to discuss academic standards, Professor. You came here to gloat. You came here expecting me to back you up as you used your position to punish a student for his political expression, something that is, I believe, explicitly protected under this university's charter." Albright was visibly sweating now, his tailored suit suddenly looking too tight. "Dean Thompson. Robert, I had no idea. It was a matter of principle. The paper really was subpar, I assure you." "Was it?" my dad interrupted, his voice cutting like a razor. "Because I took the liberty of reading it this past hour. It's an exceptionally well-researched, nuanced, and insightful piece of work. In fact, it's exactly the kind of critical analysis I would expect from a top-tier student. It's A-plus work, and you know it." He tossed the paper back onto the desk. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "You graded the hat, Professor, not the student, not the work." The silence that followed was deafening. Albright just sat there, utterly defeated, his academic arrogance stripped away to reveal the petty, prejudiced man underneath. He looked smaller, diminished. "You have put this university in a severely compromised position," my dad continued, his tone shifting from anger to disappointment. "You have violated the trust placed in you as an educator. You have allowed your personal bias to completely override your professional ethics. What you did to Jacob was not just unfair. It was a fundamental betrayal of our academic mission." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the campus. "I have 2 options here, Professor. Option 1. I initiate a formal academic review of your grading practices. We will subpoena your records for the past 5 years. We will contact students, past and present, and investigate any and all claims of biased grading. It will be a long, public, and undoubtedly ugly process for you and your career. Given what I've seen today, I have a strong suspicion about what we'll find." He turned back to face Albright, whose face had gone a ghostly white. "Or, option 2, you will immediately, right now, Change Jacob's grade to the A+ his work merited. Then you will submit your resignation, effective at the end of the semester. You'll be allowed to finish your classes, but your tenure will be revoked. You'll leave quietly, with a severance package, and we will all move on. Albright stared at him, aghast. My tenure? You can't. I can, my dad said, his voice leaving no room for argument. And I will. The choice is yours. A quiet end to your career here, or a public inferno that will likely end it everywhere. For a moment I thought Albright might fight. I saw a flicker of his old arrogance return, but then he looked at me, and he looked at my father, and whatever fight he had in him just evaporated. He knew he was beaten. He had overplayed his hand so spectacularly that he'd set his own career on fire. He slumped in his chair. Option 2, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. Good, my dad said curtly. He gestured to the phone on his desk. Call the registrar's office now. I want an email confirmation of the grade change before you leave this room. I watched, silent and numb, as Professor Albright, a man who had terrified and mesmerized an entire department, meekly picked up the phone and corrected my grade, his voice a pathetic shadow of its former booming authority. When he was done, he placed the receiver down, refused to meet my eye, and practically scurried out of the office. After the door clicked shut, my dad let out a long, heavy sigh and sank back into his chair. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the dad again, not the dean. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Jake, he said, his voice laced with exhaustion. No student should ever be treated that way. It's okay, Dad, I said, finally finding my voice. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said, shaking his head. I was just doing my job. What you did was harder. You stood your ground. You didn't let him bully you. He paused, a small smile touching his lips. Your grandfather would have been proud. I reached up and touched the brim of the red hat, which was still on my head. I'd almost forgotten it was there. It wasn't just a hat anymore. It was a lesson. A lesson that what you believe in is worth defending, but how you treat people is what truly defines you. Albright had failed that test. And in the end, that was the only F that really mattered.